What's up guys, thank you for taking time out of your day to watch my very first UFC 308 breakdown video of the week. In today's video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the matchup between Khamzat Chimaev and Robert Whittaker from a betting perspective, and we'll also be taking a look at Leroy Murphy versus Dan Ige. Tomorrow we'll be dropping another breakdown video which focuses on Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway, and if this video gets 100 likes, I'll be dropping a bonus video on Friday where I break down two fights from the prelims that get the most amount of comments from you. So if there's a fight that you would like me to break down on the prelims, let me know in the comments below, and the fights that get the two fights that get commented the most, I will break them down in a bonus video on Friday. So hit the like button, get 100 likes on this video for me, and then we'll do that bonus video dropping on Friday. Let me know what fights you'd want me to cover. We got some brilliant wins. Bruno Ferreira versus Abus Magomedov could be a good one. That's probably the most interesting fight on the prelims, to be honest. Aslam versus Kakira looks like another good one, but I'll let you guys decide. Leave a comment below, hit the like button. 100 likes, we'll do the bonus video on Friday. So now let's dive right into the co-main event between Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev, which for me is a more interesting fight than the main event between Topuria and Holloway this week. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Chimaev is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. And if we take a look at the odds on Whittaker, he's around an average of 3.10, which is going to be plus 210 for an implied probability of 32%. And I want to keep Chimaev's odds up just for a little while. Just keep them there because we're going to be talking about Chimaev's odds in a bit more detail in just a second. So Whittaker is 33 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73.5-inch reach, and Chimaev is 30 years old, 6 foot 2 with a 75-inch reach. So we can see both guys are about the same age, but obviously they're in very different stages of their careers. We know that Whittaker has started to show signs of decline over the last few years, which is no surprise when you consider he's been in over 30 pro fights, he's been in a lot of wars, he's had a lot of really bad injuries, he's taken a lot of damage. And Chimaev, on the other hand, 13-0, less than half the number of fights that Whittaker has had. So he hasn't had as many injuries, hasn't had as much wear and tear on his body. He's in a much younger stage of his career. We can also see that Chimaev has a bit of a size and reach advantage over Whittaker. Nothing major, but we do know that one of Chimaev's biggest weapons, one of the things that makes him so great, is that he's a very physically imposing fighter. Another X factor that we've got to consider on this one is that Chimaev has home advantage on his side. Now obviously he's not from the United Arab Emirates, but I did a study on Muslim fighters versus non-Muslim fighters when they compete on UFC events in the United Arab Emirates, and I actually found that over the last 17 events, Muslim fighters beat non-Muslim fighters 73% of the time. So home advantage for Muslim fighters in the United Arab Emirates is absolutely massive, and that certainly gives Chimaev a pretty big advantage statistically coming into this matchup. What I also find quite interesting is that the implied probability on his odds of 72% are pretty much where that statistic of home advantage for Muslim fighters in the United Arab Emirates sits. And so I just thought that was quite interesting. I won't be posting that study on YouTube, but if you'd like to watch the video of that study where I summarize my findings, I will leave a link to it in the description below. You can head on over to my website and watch it. It's completely free. There'll be a link in the description below that'll take you to my website. It's basically a video on there where I go through the data that I looked at and how I basically came to that percentage of 73%. So take a look at it. I won't be covering it in this video because it will just make the breakdown much longer than it needs to be. So, you've probably seen by the title and the thumbnail of this video that I'm making a pretty big deal out of Chimaev's cardio. And that's because I think this fight is going to be decided by Chimaev's cardio. I knew that Chimaev slowed against Gilbert Burns and also against Kamaru Usman, but it wasn't until I went back and researched this fight this week that I was kind of reminded of just how bad Chimaev's cardio is. And with this being a 5-rounder, this is potentially a very, very difficult fight for Chimaev. And for me, who's going to win this matchup this weekend is really going to come down to what version of Robert Whittaker we get, because there's no doubt that he's been on a pretty steep decline in recent years. His best days are definitely behind him. However, if Whittaker can turn up, perform to his full potential this weekend, he still is only 33 years old. I think he's potentially a nightmare stylistic matchup for Chimaev for the reasons we'll go into in this breakdown. I'm going to show you a little bit of footage to back up what I mean as well. So, why is this such a difficult fight or potentially a difficult fight for Chimaev? So, if we bring up UFC stats over here, if we bring this over and we bring up Robert Whittaker's record, we can see that Robert Whittaker's takedown defense is 82%. Now, this is pretty impressive when you take into consideration that Robert Whittaker has been consistently competing against the best fighters in the world since pretty much coming to the UFC. He fought Court McGee in his third fight in the UFC, which was, a very different Court McGee back then, very difficult opponent. Went straight into fighting guys like Stephen Thompson. So the fact that Whittaker has been able to maintain such a high takedown defense statistic throughout his entire career, when he's consistently been competing against the best fighters in the world, super impressive, and it just speaks to how difficult it is to take Robert Whittaker down and hold him down, to the extent that no one has ever really been able to take Whittaker down and hold him down. He did give up a cheap takedown towards the end of the first round against Duplessis and looked quite weak off his back, but outside of that, no one has been able to take Whittaker down and hold him down for very long. He's got great balance. He does a great job of reading takedown entries. He's extremely difficult to get to the ground, which is obviously a huge issue for a guy like Chimaev, who obviously has grappling as his biggest strength. He's one of the best MMA grapplers in the UFC. Extremely strong grappling control, very physically imposing grappler. And we know if the fight does go to the ground, Chimaev will have a huge advantage. But if he can't get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground, all that is going to mean absolutely nothing. So when I look at this fight, for me, this is one of those matchups where early in the fight, Whittaker's going to be in a lot of trouble. I think Chimaev has, more power, more impactfulness on his punches. I don't feel Whittaker's as dangerous on the feet as he used to be. I feel Whittaker's changed more into a volume striker these days. So early in the first round, I think Chimaev will do pretty well on the feet. I think he'll be walking Whittaker down, landing some big shots. I think you'll see Whittaker bouncing around on the outside, just trying to stay behind that jab, chip away at Chimaev from the outside. And from there, it's difficult to know what to expect from Chimaev, because in the two fights we've seen him go the distance, once against Gilbert Burns and then once obviously against Kamaru Usman in his last fight, we've seen two completely different strategic approaches to the fight from Chimaev. So in the Gilbert Burns fight, he came out like he usually does, comes out the gate super hard, very aggressive, looking to get Burns out of there in round one. And then when Burns weathers the early storm, Chimaev tried to keep up that high pace into the second and third round and ended up gassing himself really bad, fading very hard, looking really bad actually, and almost losing a very close decision to Burns. It was a unanimous decision, but it was a very, very close competitive fight. Now, in the Usman fight, we saw a completely different strategic approach from Chimaev, where instead of coming out the gate super hard like he did against Burns and trying to keep that pressure and that pace on Gilbert Burns in the hope that Burns would break, Chimaev showed an evolution from the Burns fight and showed that he learned from the Burns fight, because when he didn't get Usman out of there in round one after a very aggressive first round where he had Usman's back and was, attacking with the rear naked choke for much of the round, when he couldn't get Usman out of there in round one, he recognized that he needed to slow the pace down of the fight, take it a little bit easier so he didn't gas himself out. And then we saw Chimaev, really kind of coast in round two and then try and steal the fight in round three with a takedown. So this is good in some respect, because Chimaev showed that he's smart enough to know that he can't just go out there, ragdoll everyone in round one, choke them out and get an easy win. He showed that he knows in certain situations, he's going to have to pace himself and take it a little bit easier. The problem for Chimaev is that he still looked dreadful in the second and third rounds of the Usman fight, to the extent where the commentators were even saying in the second round of the fight, Chimaev's not doing anything. So I can't play you that audio here because obviously the video will just get copyright flagged. But as I complete the breakdown for this fight, what I want to do is play you the second round of the Chimaev-Usman fight in the background so that you can see what I mean as I'm kind of talking you through this one, right? So go into round 2. So in the first round, Chimaev takes Usman down, mauls him, dominates him, puts round 1 in the bank. And then Chimaev's kind of realised, okay, so I haven't been able to get him out of there, and I can't continue fighting at this pace or I'm going to gas myself. So I need to like take my foot off the gas, take it easy now, right? So if you look at this second round, let me just make sure on this display you've got it. Yeah. So if you look at this second round, right? Chimaev basically takes the whole of the second round off. And even towards the end of this round and into round 3, what's really concerning about this performance from Chimaev is that he does look pretty tired. And that's a big concern because in the first round he was in total control. He basically got the takedown on Usman pretty easily, just dominated him on the ground. So in the first round he was able to dictate the pace of the fight by completely controlling Usman on the ground. And then in the second round, he was also able to control the pace of the fight because Usman didn't really attack him. He didn't really force him to engage. And so Chimaev shouldn't be looking as tired in this fight, in my opinion, as he did, because he didn't really do tons in the first and second round, which would explain why he would slow down as much as he did. So you can see that we're like 2 minutes into the second round here, and Chimaev's literally thrown like 1 strike. At some point in this round, and again I can't play it for you, but at some point in this round the commentators say, look, he's not doing anything. And what I'll do, I'll just skim through the final minute of the round, because you can see what Chimaev's basically done is use the GSP strategy of not really doing a whole lot for the first 4 minutes of the round, and then trying to steal the round with a late takedown, which, to be fair, he did. He got a late takedown. Usman gave it up pretty cheap. But before that, you know, Chimaev did very little. So if we go into the third round now, what I want to show you is how tired Chimaev looks, right? So this is 2 minutes into round 3. And what you've got to remember is this has not been a difficult fight for Chimaev. He got the takedown easily on Usman in round 1, dominated him on the ground. Did basically nothing for the first 4 minutes of round 2 before, again, getting an easy takedown on Usman, which he didn't have to work that hard to get. And so if we hit play here in this third round, just look at how sloppy Chimaev looks on the feet. You know, his mouth's open wide at this stage in the fight. And don't get me wrong, he's not totally gassed. But, you know, his mouth is starting to open wide. He's looking flat with his footwork. His hand speed is slow. And you can just tell from his body language and the way he moves that he's very tired here. Obviously, you know, live betting is my bread and butter. Live betting on the UFC is what I specialize in. Over the long term, we make money live betting 70% of UFC events. So I can just read when guys are tired. That's one of the big edges I've got in making money in live betting. I can spot the signs pretty early. So to the naked eye, you may look at a guy like like Chimaev in this third round. You may not see it, you may not appreciate it. But when you look at the movement of Chimaev here, how flat he looks compared to the previous 2 rounds, how much easier he is to hit in this round, you can just see that he's fading pretty hard. So he obviously gets the takedown. And then with about 30 seconds left to go, Usman gets back up. And again, just look at the body language from Chimaev here, how tired he looks. Just take a look, right? How flat he looks in this little 30-second sequence. Mouth open wide. 10 seconds left to go. You can see his boxing defense is bad. Just flat in these exchanges, under pressure late on, right? So I'm not going to go and show you like tons of footage from the Gilbert Burns fight, because we don't want this breakdown video to be super long. But if we pull up the third round of the Gilbert Burns fight, I also just want you to appreciate how tired he looked in round 3. Now, here we've got a situation where he wasn't super gassed in the third round against Kamaru Usman, because like I say, he was in total control in the first and second round, but he was still definitely slowing. But what we can see from Chimaev is that when he starts to get tired, his striking defense starts to really, it starts to get pretty bad, and he becomes very, very hittable, which is obviously an important factor to take into consideration in this Whittaker fight, because we know how good of a boxer Whittaker is. So when they disengage from this position, I just want you to see here how vulnerable Chimaev looks on the feet, how bad his striking defense after he's slowed a bit. Because we've got to remember, Whittaker's got pretty legendary cardio. So after Burns survives this sequence here, skip through a little bit, and they go back to the middle of the octagon. Just want you to pay attention to the sloppiness of Chimaev, really. Like, we kind of saw it in the third round when Usman started to let his hands go, how clean Usman was able to land on him. How it was almost like Chimaev was too tired to slip and evade the shots. You can see like the hand speed is really slow from Chimaev here. And what you've also got to remember, using this fight as kind of a measuring stick, is that Burns is very tired here. So where he's landing these clean, hard shots on Chimaev, Whittaker's unlikely to be tired at this point in the fight. You know, Whittaker's a cardio machine. He's built a career off being able to fight at a high pace for 5 rounds. You know, there's a minute and a half left to go in round 3. And you can just see how bad Chimaev's striking defense is here. Like, Gilbert Burns is lighting him up. And you've got to think, you know, if it was Whittaker in here instead of Burns, obviously Burns is tired. He's a little bit sloppy now. He doesn't have much power or much pop in his shots, much hand speed here at this stage in the fight. Whittaker's a whole different ball game. So I want to show you, I just wanted to show you that footage of Chimaev, because I really do feel that this fight is going to come down to just really 2 things. Irrespective of how these 2 guys match up stylistically, I think it's going to come down to 2 things. I think it's going to come down to what version of Whittaker we get. Is he totally shot? Is his head still in the game? You know, is he on a steep decline? Is he still capable of performing, you know, at the highest level? He is on a decline. There's no other way to dress it up. The second thing this fight is going to be decided by is Chimaev's cardio. And to some extent, linking both of those things together, the third thing that is going to determine the outcome of this fight is whether or not Whittaker can make it through the first round. If he can, I think he stands a great chance of winning this. Because I'm going to summarize everything that we've talked about, everything we've seen. So, the thing about Chimaev is, when he's fresh, early in fights, he's so physically imposing, and he's such a good MMA grappler, that I think he's one of these guys, like Khabib, where no matter how good your takedown defense is, I still don't think you're going to be able to stop a guy like Chimaev from taking you down. So even though Whittaker has historically shown amazing takedown defense, he's very scrambly, he's very difficult to take down and hold down, I still think Chimaev will get him down early. But the thing about Chimaev is, he appears to be one of these guys that if he just grapples a little bit, he does tend to get tired very quickly. And we see this in both the Burns fight and the Usman fight. If you go back and watch those matchups in their entirety, in the first round of the Usman fight, he obviously grappled very hard, and then he needed to take the entire second round off to recover. And then when he got the takedown on Usman towards the end of round 3, and then Usman worked his way back up to his feet, in that last 30 seconds, Chimaev looked very tired and sloppy. So I think Chimaev is one of these guys who's got the blessing of being one of the best MMA grapplers of all time, but unfortunately he can't utilize that advantage for very long. He's maybe cursed in a way like a Rodolfo Vieira, where I think he's one of these guys that burns through a lot of energy when he grapples, and we see this in the Gilbert Burns fight. You know, there was a bit of grappling in the, if you look at the third round of the Burns fight, Chimaev looked all right at the beginning of the round, and then there was a bit of a grappling exchange up against the cage, and then after that, Chimaev looked very, very slow and sloppy. So with Whittaker having pretty good takedown defense, this fight gets very interesting to me, because if Whittaker makes it through the first round, Whittaker's takedown defense is good enough to make Chimaev work hard for takedowns. And the more tired Chimaev gets, the longer the fight goes, the harder and harder it is going to be to take Whittaker down. And the more energy Chimaev exerts trying to get Whittaker down, the sloppier he's going to look on the feet, the more gassed he's going to look on the feet, which will make it harder to set up the takedowns, harder to get the takedowns, and it will also make him more vulnerable on the feet, which is a huge issue, because we know Whittaker won't slow down in the same way that Gilbert Burns did. And we also know that this is a 5-rounder. If this were a 3-round fight, I think Chimaev would be a very, very difficult stylistic matchup for Whittaker, because he'd likely have enough cardio to steal 2 out of the 3 rounds in the same way that he did to Kamaru Usman. But with this being a 5-rounder, and looking at how flat Chimaev looked in the third against both Burns and Usman, I just think if Whittaker shows up and performs anywhere close to his full potential, he can likely turn Chimaev into a panic wrestler by the 3rd round and light him up on the feet, because we know Whittaker's cardio is legendary. So this fight for me is going to come down to Chimaev's cardio and whether Whittaker can make it out of the first round. That's just how I see it. Now, what does all that mean from a betting point of view? Well, when we look at the odds, we can see that Whittaker is a pretty big underdog, and his odds carry an implied probability of around 32%. In my opinion, if you're to bet this fight, you have to take Whittaker. You would be crazy, in my opinion, to bet Chimaev as a big favourite when we've seen him gas in the 2 fights he's been in that have gone 3 rounds, and now he's competing in a 5-round fight against a cardio machine that's difficult to take down and hold down. So for me, there is no doubt that Whittaker is the better side to be on here, the stronger side to be on, because I just feel the odds on Chimaev are so steep that they give you a pretty bad risk to reward ratio. Now, having said that, I have conducted a study on how often Muslim fighters beat non-Muslim fighters in the United Arab Emirates, and the numbers don't lie. Home advantage is huge for Muslims in the United Arab Emirates, with them winning 73% of the time when they fight non-Muslims. So for me, I don't like to fight strong trends. I don't want to be trying to pick the 27% of fighters, the 27% of non-Muslims that defeat that trend and go against that trend. I would much prefer to be betting with the trend and find situations where I can bet on Muslim fighters that have a real good chance of winning, and the odds are also decent without too many major risk factors. Those are the kind of bets that I'm scouting, and Chimaev doesn't quite tick those boxes for me because his odds are very, very steep, and he does have a few big weaknesses that Whittaker is well positioned to exploit. And so for me, this fight is a very difficult one because, I really feel Whittaker's got a great shot of winning this, but at the same time I have to be realistic with myself and say, do I want to fight against the trend which sees guys like Chimaev win 73% of the time? And like I say, if you're a member of my website, check out the study I've done on Muslim fighters versus non-Muslim fighters in the United Arab Emirates. It's a very interesting study. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. So yeah, it's pretty much how I see it, is dog or pass. In terms of the over-under on this one, we can see that the fight in the eyes of the bookies is very unlikely to go to a decision. I guess that makes sense because Obviously, most likely outcomes here, a Chimaev by early finish, or perhaps Whittaker by late finish when Chimaev becomes too tired to defend himself. The odds on the over 1.5 rounds are a little bit steep to me at 1.44 minus 227, but I will keep an eye on them to see what they are. I do think there's a reasonably good chance this fight goes deep, just because, like I say, Chimaev's a tough guy. He's shown that against Burns. He showed that against Usman. Whittaker's also a tough guy. It's very rare that he completely capitulates. So both guys are probably tough enough to last for a while. You know, I'd be surprised if this fight ended super early, which is why I'm kind of giving Whittaker a very good chance of winning this. So in terms of most likely outcome for the props, Whittaker by decision at 7.50 is interesting to me, but then again, you know, based on the study I've done of Muslim fighters versus non-Muslim fighters, it's not going to be easy for Whittaker to win a decision in the United Arab Emirates against someone like Chimaev. So you could look at things like Whittaker to win in round 4, Whittaker to win in round 5. Obviously, these kind of bets are not super likely to hit. They're very specific props. But obviously, when you're placing bets on odds ranges of like 23.0, 24.0, you don't have to win many bets like this over the long term to be profitable on them. So those are a couple I would look at. I do think there's a good chance Whittaker finishes Chimaev late, because I'm visualizing what would happen if Whittaker were in there instead of Gilbert Burns, and there were an extra 2 rounds in that fight. I don't think Chimaev would have survived against Whittaker for an extra 10 minutes. I just think, you know, Whittaker's cardio would have enabled him to just put a pace on Chimaev that he couldn't keep up with. But let me know what you guys think. That's how I see this fight. It's a great fight. It's an interesting fight. I can't wait for it. But let me know what you think. And don't forget, if you want that bonus video on Friday where we'll be breaking down some prelim matchups, hit the like button below. Get this video to 100 likes. And we'll be dropping that video on Friday. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Lerone Murphy versus Dan 50k Ige. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Murphy is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. If we take a look at the odds on Ige, he's around an average of 3.10, which is going to be plus 210 for an implied probability of 32%. And I didn't realise until I did my research this week that Murphy's actually pretty old for a featherweight at 33 years old. When I think of Lerone Murphy, I think of like this young up-and-coming prospect, because he hasn't had many fights. He's only had 15 pro fights. But at 33 years old, he's getting pretty old for featherweight, and his career could start to be over before it's even begun, really, which is probably why the UFC is starting to push him with main events against Edson Barboza and big fights like this on the main card against Dan Ige. You know, Murphy has got father time against him at the moment. So he's 5'9" with a 73.5-inch reach. Ige's also 33 years old. He's 5'7" with a 71-inch reach. So we know Ige is pretty undersized for the division. He's pretty small. Obviously, he does have big power, but he's smaller, more muscular, more compact. Murphy is longer and taller. He's quite muscular as well, but different body types going on here. This is one of those fights where I would definitely keep an eye on the ceremonial weigh-ins, because I have a feeling Murphy might have a pretty decent size advantage over Ige, but we're going to have to wait until the ceremonial weigh-ins to see for sure exactly how that looks. So this is one of those fights where when I look at how they match up stylistically and I look at the odds are surprising to me. I would say they're very wide. I am surprised Ige is this much of an underdog. Having said that, I still think Lerone Murphy very likely to win this weekend, and I heavily lean towards Lerone Murphy. It is a shame he's such a big favourite. I don't think there's any upside in betting him in this odds range, but I do expect Murphy to win this weekend. So how do these two guys match up stylistically? Well, what's interesting about this fight, if we start off by talking about how they match up when it comes to grappling, Ige's actually the grappler out of the two. He's got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, Ige never tries to take his opponents down, and his own takedown defense is actually pretty bad, and he's very weak off his back. So even though Lerone Murphy is quite low level on the ground, a lower level on the ground than Ige, I actually give Murphy the advantage when it comes to grappling, just based on the fact that Murphy is a better MMA grappler. Murphy is more likely to shoot takedowns, and so, you know, in a fight like this, if one guy's more likely to shoot takedowns than the other, you kind of got to give him a bit of an edge when it comes to MMA grappling if the other guy's got bad takedown defense, because if the guy that's got bad takedown defense gets taken down, ends up on his back, even though he might have the higher level ground game, 9 times out of 10 in MMA, the guy in top position is still the guy winning the fight. So I'd actually give Murphy the advantage on the ground. We're starting to see him incorporate a lot more grappling into his fights these days, and because Ige never shoots takedowns and he accepts being on the bottom a lot, I just think Murphy's got the potential to steal some rounds with takedowns here, mix things up a bit, and score some points with some takedowns and top control. I also give Murphy the advantage on the feet, partly because he's a bit longer and a bit taller than Ige. He knows how to use his length, knows how to use his reach. But for me, the biggest reason why I like Murphy when it comes to striking in this matchup is because I think Ige has kind of fallen into the trap of headhunting a little bit. So earlier in Ige's career, when he first came to the UFC, his nickname was actually Dan Dynamite Ige, because he would pick up all these knockout wins, right? If we look at his early fights, you know, he would knock guys down, he would rock them, he would wobble them. You know, we've got a knockout against Damon Jackson, knockout against Gavin Tucker. He actually knocked down Mike Santiago as well, but he scored several knockdowns in these sort of fights. Like in a lot of these fights, Mirsad Bektik in particular inflicted a lot of damage on Bektik. He would kind of rock guys, wobble guys, knock them down, all that sort of stuff. So Ige built this reputation for having big power, Dan Dynamite Ige. And because he had big power and he had a few highlight reel finishes and he was involved in some exciting fights, he then kind of fell in love with the bonus checks, right? And changed his name to Dan 50k Ige, referencing the performance bonuses. And I feel like this is what kind of led to Ige's downfall. Because when you look at Ige's performances earlier in the UFC, he had great leg kicks, he had a very nice jab, and he would use the leg kicks and the jab to set up his knockouts and knockdowns. And he was a very good boxer, very technical striker. But after getting a few big knockout wins and hurting guys with his big power on the feet, he kind of went away from his leg kicks and jabs and turned into much more of a headhunter. And when you start headhunting, start looking to load up and land that one big shot, it becomes much more difficult for you to get the knockout, get that one big shot, because, you know, you're not setting things up, right? Every time you come forward and attack your opponent knows you're looking for that big right hand. You don't really have the element of surprise on your side. And you say, they say the shots will knock you out of the ones you don't see coming. Ige didn't really have that. And so, yeah, this is one of those fights where I just think Murphy is the busier striker out of the two. We know he's tough. We know he's durable. We know he's got good cardio. He just throws a higher volume of strikes, and I think he likely outpoints Dan Ige on the feet. So this is one of those fights when I look at the odds, I'm like, damn, the odds are wide. I don't think Murphy should be that big of a favourite, but at the same time, I've got to accept Murphy is more likely to win this fight. And so this is one of those matchups where I would pick Murphy to win, but I cannot bet him in this odds range, and I don't like the idea of betting on a fighter like Dan Ige when I don't think he's going to win. That's just my personal philosophy on betting, and it's what helps me make a profit every single year on everything that I do that is sports betting related. So yeah, that's just my philosophy. Obviously, if you want to bet this fight, I guess Ige gives you a better risk to reward ratio. The odds are pretty bad on Murphy, but I'd be surprised if Ige won this. I'm more confident in Murphy than I am in Chimaev, that's for damn sure. And both guys obviously in a similar odds range. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's pretty likely this fight goes to a decision. If we look at Ige's record, the majority of his fights go to a decision. If we look at Murphy's record, his last 3 fights have gone to a decision. 4 of his last 5 have gone to a decision. And we know both these guys are very tough, very well-rounded, very durable. They've both got very, very good chins. So yeah, pretty likely this fight goes deep. The odds reflect that. The odds are pretty steep on the fight to go to a decision, which I personally wouldn't touch because obviously, you know, both guys do have big power at the end of the day. It's a 15-minute cage fight to the death. Only takes one big shot to land for one of these guys to get knocked out, but the most likely outcome is this fight will go to a decision. In terms of most likely outcomes for the props, the only prop I would consider is Murphy by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible. In percentage terms, for a highly specific bet like a prop, they're not all that much better than Murphy's moneyline odds, so you probably want to give that a miss. I hope you found that breakdown useful, and if you did, I'll be back tomorrow breaking down the fight between Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway, as well as a couple of others from the main card like Shara, and we'll also do the Shara versus Petrosian fight, and we'll take a look at Rakic versus Ankalaev as well. If you want that bonus video on Friday, hit the like button below, subscribe if you haven't already. Take care everyone, love you all, have a great night, see you very soon.